If you shift your attention right now from these words to your breathing, the air in the room does not change. The pressure waves entering your ears do not change. The weight of your body against the surface beneath you does not change. But inside the brain, measurable activity begins to redistribute. Signals from the body receive a different weight. Some sensory inputs become sharper, others fade. Frontal and parietal networks help select what will be allowed to dominate the next moment of experience. Ordinary intuition expects something simpler. The brain works, and consciousness watches the result. Perception arrives, the mind observes it, and attention is just a small inner spotlight moving over a finished scene. But that is not what the nervous system does. Attention is not merely a spectator. When it moves, the way the brain processes the world changes with it. The physical consequence is not small. Without a deeper selection mechanism, conscious life would begin to fragment under its own input. The brain would receive sound, colour, touch, muscle tension, heartbeat signals, memory fragments, and emotional predictions without enough priority control. A voice could dissolve into background noise. Pain could spread across the whole conscious field. Movement could detach from intention. Internal time could lose coordination. A living organism would be flooded by more information than it could use. The mismatch begins here, not with a vague mystery, but with a measurable mismatch between what consciousness feels like from the inside and what the brain is doing from the outside. Electrophysiology, brain imaging, attention experiments, and predictive models all point toward the same pressure point. Conscious focus is linked to real changes in neural dynamics. That does not prove that consciousness is a separate force. It does not reduce consciousness to a useless shadow either. It forces a more precise question. What is a decision to pay attention if that decision is itself part of the brain it changes? A moment ago, many signals were already present. Perhaps there was a faint sound in the room, a pressure along the jaw, a coolness on the face, a small tension somewhere in the back, a rhythm in the chest. Most of them did not stand at the center of experience. They did not disappear. They were held near the edge, given lower priority while language occupied the foreground. The world you experienced was not the whole incoming stream. It was the selected stream. Consciousness, therefore, does not appear in direct experience like a motionless screen. It behaves more like an active field of access. Where attention settles, details gain contour. A sensation that was vague a second earlier becomes definite. A sound that was part of the background separates from the room. A thought that was only beginning to form can be held long enough to become a sentence. The rest of the scene does not vanish. It continues to be processed, but without the same conscious availability. This image is useful only if it returns to biology. Attention is not invisible magic. In neuroscience, it can be studied as a change in the sensitivity of neural circuits, a competition between signals, a redistribution of processing resources, and a change in what becomes important for later action. When you focus on one voice in a noisy space, the auditory system does not passively record sound like a microphone. The brain gives more weight to certain frequencies, speech rhythms, expected locations, and meanings that it has already begun to predict. That creates a precise tension. Subjectively, it feels as if I direct attention. Objectively, a scientist sees changing patterns of activity across distributed networks, and those networks are themselves the brain. One level of description speaks in the language of intention. The other speaks in the language of neurons, synapses, electrical potentials, oscillations, and chemical transmitters. Neither level is simply false. The difficulty begins when we try to join them without losing what each one explains. If consciousness were only a passive glow appearing after a neural processing had already finished, it would be hard to explain why conscious training, deliberate focus, or changed expectation can alter the next stage of processing. If consciousness were instead an independent power outside the nervous system, another problem would appear immediately. Where exactly would it enter the biological machinery? How would it transfer information? Why would its states shift so reliably with fatigue? Brain injury, anesthesia, sleep, seizures, and drugs that alter synaptic transmission? Neither shortcut is enough. The simple one-way picture breaks under pressure from both sides. A quiet experiment shows the problem more clearly than a definition. Rest attention on the sound of the words, then move it to the breath. Nothing outside has been physically rearranged in order to make the breath more real. Yet the available world has changed. Not the entire external world, but the world selected, weighted, and presented by the brain as the current field of experience. That is why the problem of consciousness resists easy handling. Consciousness is both the thing being investigated and part of the instrument doing the investigation. When the brain is measured from the outside, researchers observe electrical patterns, blood flow changes, connectivity, response times, and behavior. When experience is described from the inside, it begins from the first-person point, where a sensation is felt, a thought appears, a decision seems to form. Between these two perspectives, there is not an empty gap. They are linked at every moment. But the link is not a simple equation in which one side quietly swallows the other. Modern neuroscience begins with a strong foundation. The brain is a physical organ. It is made of cells that communicate through electrochemical signals. Damage to specific regions can alter vision, language, memory, emotion, planning, bodily awareness, and even the sense of self. Anesthesia can remove conscious experience so completely that the time between two moments leaves no trace. Sleep, dreaming, wakefulness, delirium, epileptic activity, deep concentration, and meditation correspond to different patterns of brain dynamics. That is why a powerful scientific picture emerged and remained central. The brain gives rise to consciousness, not like a simple machine producing a single output, but like a complex living system whose coordinated activity creates an inner point of view. A neuron by itself does not contain pain, a remembered face, or the feeling of cold air in the lungs, but billions of neurons connected by synapses, shaped by chemical modulation, organized across time and altered by learning, can produce properties that are not visible in any single part. This model is not weak. It is not a crude denial of inner life. It has allowed researchers to map visual pathways, understand the role of the hippocampus in memory, study the neural basis of decision-making, recognize disorders of consciousness, and develop treatments for damaged or unstable nervous systems. It shows that the back of the brain is deeply involved in visual processing, that auditory signals enter specialized regions of the temporal lobe, that motor cortex participates in movement, and that limbic and regulatory systems shape emotion and motivation. But the strength of the model creates the next question. If the brain creates consciousness, why does consciousness feel like something that can also guide the brain? Why does intention not feel merely like a picture arriving at the end of a process? Why can we hold back an automatic reaction, return attention to a task, suppress an impulse, change the interpretation of a situation, or consciously slow the breath and alter the body's state? One answer is that intention is itself a brain process. That is reasonable, and it is almost certainly part of the truth. But the sentence is not yet an explanation. Saying that conscious intention is neural activity is like saying that a bird flies because it is made of cells. It may be true, but it does not tell us how lift, muscle, wing shape, and air pressure work together. For conscious control, the mechanism has to describe loops, how higher-level interpretations alter lower-level processing, and how experience changes the next selection of signals. The brain is not a device that receives the world at one end and prints consciousness at the other. The senses do not deliver finished reality. They deliver photons, pressure waves, chemical traces, skin deformation, joint position, muscle stretch, organ signals, and changes in the internal chemistry. The brain has to build something usable from them. It has to estimate what matters, what belongs to the body, what comes from outside, what is dangerous, what is familiar, what is new, and what can be ignored for now. If every signal were treated as equally important, processing would jam. A body cannot survive by taking in the world without ranking it. A tiny itch, a remembered embarrassment, the hum of a machine, the pressure of clothing, a distant engine, the shape of a word, the rhythm of breathing, the position of the feet, and a shift in facial expression cannot all command the same level of access. Conscious life depends on controlled exclusion as much as inclusion. The nervous system begins filtering before anything becomes a clear thought. The retina does not send a raw photograph to the brain. It emphasizes contrasts, edges, motion, and changes in light. The auditory system tracks patterns in frequency, timing, and location. Touch and body position systems constantly report pressure, stretch, and movement, but most of those signals remain outside awareness unless they become relevant. Even before consciousness enters the scene, the body is already simplifying the storm. The classical direction of processing is often called bottom-up. Signals begin at the sensory surface and move inward. Light reaches the retina, neural signals travel through visual pathways, and the brain builds features such as orientation, colour, movement, depth, and shape. Sound vibrates the eardrum, becomes activity in the cochlea and auditory nerve, and is gradually organised into rhythm, pitch, location, and speech. In this picture, consciousness seems to be the last link in a chain. The world arrives, the brain processes it, and experience appears. But real processing is not a one-way conveyor belt. Signals also travel from higher systems back down toward earlier sensory areas. What the brain expects, what it is searching for, what it fears, what it has learned, and what it currently needs can change the activity of the systems receiving input. This is top-down modulation. It does not mean the mind freely paints reality over the senses. It means the brain uses context, memory, goals, and predictions to adjust its own sensitivity. In a quiet room, a refrigerator hum may disappear from awareness for minutes at a time. The moment it stops, the silence becomes noticeable. The sound was not important until its absence violated a prediction. In a crowd, your name can cut through overlapping voices because the brain gives special weight to a pattern connected to self, memory, and relevance. In pain, expectation can change intensity. A harmless medical procedure may hurt more if the body is prepared for threat, while the same input can feel less severe when the situation is understood and controlled. The incoming signal matters, but it never enters an empty system. This loop is not a decorative addition to perception. Without it, perception would be slower, poorer, and less useful. The organism has to act before perfect information arrives. It has to recognize a face in dim light, follow speech through noise, estimate whether a moving object will cross its path, and prepare muscles before a step is complete. The brain cannot wait for the world to become fully known. It must use the past to pre-structure the present. Here consciousness enters a more precise frame. It does not need to be treated as a separate entity outside the brain, sending commands inward. But it is also difficult to treat it as a passive afterimage with no effect. Conscious experience is embedded in regulatory loops where higher interpretations influence lower processing. When you decide to listen for one instrument in a piece of music, auditory attention favors certain patterns. When you search for keys in low light, the visual system begins to privilege small metallic shapes, edges, and reflections. When you reframe a bodily sensation as effort rather than danger, the emotional and autonomic context can shift. A river is a better image than a pipe. A pipe carries water in one direction, from source to outlet, from sense to perception. A river has eddies, backflows, changing banks, and currents that reshape the path of later water. In the brain, higher areas do not simply issue finished commands like an officer reading a map. They change probabilities. They raise the gain of some neural populations, dampen others, tune expected rhythms, and prepare the system for what may be about to arrive. The physical consequence is sharp. The world we experience is not a simple imprint. It is a negotiated result between input and model. If raw input dominated completely, the brain would drown in detail. If the model dominated completely, perception would lose contact with what is actually happening. Conscious experience requires tension between the two. The world must be able to correct the brain. The brain must be able to prepare the world it expects. Illusions reveal this tension, but they are not just little mistakes for amusement. They expose the rules ordinary perception uses when it works well. When the brain misjudges lighting and shadow, a colour can appear different from what a measuring device would report. When a sound is ambiguous, an expected word can seem to be present. When an image can be interpreted in two ways, conscious perception may flip between them, while the light on the retina stays unchanged. The nervous system is not failing in these moments. It is showing the same interpretive machinery that lets perception function under incomplete information. The more precise question is not whether the brain constructs experience. It clearly participates in constructing it. The question is how much of that construction can be shaped by what becomes conscious. Some expectations cannot be changed by command. You cannot simply decide to stop seeing a visual illusion. You cannot choose to make pain disappear at will. You cannot order the heartbeat to follow a perfect rhythm and expect the body to obey like a machine. Yet conscious attention can still alter processing. It can change what is searched for, how a sensation is interpreted, how breathing unfolds, and which impulse is allowed to become action. This exposes a pressure crack in the simplest picture. The brain gives rise to consciousness, but conscious states can become part of the processes that change subsequent brain activity. Cause does not run only in one line. It bends into loops. Neural activity enables intention. Intention changes neural activity. Changed activity alters perception. New perception reshapes the next intention. The difficulty is not whether the brain matters. The difficulty is how a biological system creates a subjective point of control that becomes part of the system being controlled. A useful scientific model has to explain that loop without turning consciousness into a ghost and without flattening it into a decorative echo. It has to show why attention changes processing, why expectation changes perception, why awareness can influence memory and action, and why all of this remains dependent on living tissue. The problem is biological before it becomes philosophical. It begins with timing, signal strength, feedback, and selection. One of the most influential ways to describe this is predictive processing. Its central idea is quiet, but it changes the shape of the problem. The brain does not wait passively for the world to enter. It constantly predicts what is likely to happen, then uses sensory signals to correct those predictions. Perception is not a fresh construction from zero in every moment. It is an ongoing comparison between what the system expected and what actually arrived. Walk into a familiar room in low light and you do not inspect every object as if you had never seen the room before. The brain already has a model of the space. The probable location of walls, furniture, floor, door, light source, and safe paths for movement. That model lets the body move smoothly with limited information. If something has been moved into the walkway, or if a sound comes from a place that should be silent, the prediction fails. The error becomes important because it tells the brain that the model needs updating. The technical term prediction error refers to the difference between the expected signal and the incoming signal. If the difference is small, experience flows with little disturbance. A step is where the body expected it to be. A familiar voice continues in a familiar rhythm. The floor resists the foot as predicted. The world feels stable because the brain's model and the incoming stream agree well enough for action. If the difference is large, attention tightens. A missing stare produces a sudden bodily interruption before a clear thought appears. A familiar voice using an unfamiliar tone changes the weight of the words. A sentence with an impossible word breaks the rhythm of reading. Consciousness often becomes especially vivid, where a smooth model meets resistance. The predictive brain is not a fortune teller. It is a biological system using probability. Previous experience, bodily state, cultural meaning, immediate goals, and sensory input combine into estimates useful enough for survival and behaviour. These prior expectations are sometimes called priors. They are not always conscious beliefs. Many are weights built into perception by learning, development, and repeated exposure. They prepare the system before full confirmation is available. Imagine a coastal observatory tracking tides, weather, and shipping lights through the night. Most of what appears on the instruments is expected. The tide rises within range. The wind shifts according to the forecast. A known vessel moves along a planned route. When the instruments agree with the model, nothing has to seize attention. But if a light appears where no vessel should be, or a pressure change arrives too fast, the mismatch reorganizes the room. The model is not thrown away at once. It is tested, adjusted, and compared against new signals. The brain works with a much denser and more intimate version of this process. It predicts the next word in a sentence before the word fully arrives. It predicts the sensory result of moving the eyes before the visual field shifts. It predicts the pressure under the foot before the step lands. It predicts the likely meaning of a facial expression before every detail is consciously inspected. This is one reason experience feels immediate. Much of the work has been prepared before it is noticed. Predictive processing also explains why bodily state changes perception so powerfully. Fatigue alters expectations about available energy. Anxiety increases the weight of possible threat. Hunger gives food-related signals more priority. Slow breathing can change autonomic conditions that influence attention and emotional appraisal. The brain never predicts the world from nowhere. It predicts from inside a body with needs, limitations, rhythms, and histories. The body is not just a container for the brain. Even in this early layer of the problem, the boundary begins to soften. The direction of the eyes determines which signals become available. Muscle tension changes readiness for action. Breathing changes the state in which attention operates. Internal signals from the heart, lungs, gut, and blood chemistry shape the background from which the world is interpreted. A neutral room can feel safe or threatening depending partly on the body's own regulatory state. But the main problem still returns to attention. If the brain is always predicting, comparing, correcting, and preparing, why are we not conscious of all of it? Why does almost all of this hidden work remain unavailable, while one phrase, one sensation, one memory, or one decision suddenly becomes clear? Consider the experience of searching for a word you know but cannot retrieve. Something is active before the answer arrives. The mind fills the gap. Nearby words may appear and be rejected. A sound, a letter, a face, a place, or a fragment of meaning may hover without becoming complete. Then, often without warning, the word appears. It does not feel as if you built it piece by piece in consciousness. It feels as if it crossed a threshold. This threshold is one of the most important clues. The brain can process information without making it conscious. A stimulus can influence reaction time without being clearly reported. A bodily signal can change posture before it becomes a feeling. A memory can guide a choice before its source is identified. Many parts of the nervous system are working all the time, but only a narrow portion becomes available to the systems that support deliberate report, planning, reflection, and controlled action. If everything became conscious, conscious life would not expand into perfect clarity. It would collapse into overload. Every shift of pressure on the skin, every correction of eye movement, every syllable predicted before speech, every autonomic adjustment, every partial memory, every possible interpretation of an ambiguous signal would compete for the same limited field. The fact that most processing stays hidden is not a flaw. It is one of the conditions that makes coherent experience possible. This gives attention a second role. It is not only a beam that brightens what is already conscious, it helps determine which signals may reach conscious access at all. A faint sound may remain background until it matches a current goal. A bodily sensation may stay peripheral until it is interpreted as pain, threat, or relevance. A detail in a visual scene may remain unseen until the task gives it weight. Attention changes the probability that a signal will cross the threshold from local processing into wider availability. The word threshold can sound too simple, as if consciousness were controlled by a single switch. The brain is not built that way. There is no tiny chamber where all signals line up and wait to be admitted by a guard. There are interacting networks, feedback loops, changing levels of excitability, competition between interpretations, and shifting demands from the body and environment. A threshold in this context is dynamic. It depends on context, relevance, timing, strength, expectation, and the current state of the whole organism. A sudden pain reaches consciousness quickly because it has direct biological urgency. A faint memory may need many associations before it becomes available. A repeated sound fades because the model predicts it and reduces its priority. A new sound in the same room may pull attention because prediction error gives it weight. The conscious field is therefore not a mirror. It is a controlled access system, shaped by what the organism can use. The strange part is that conscious access then changes the system that selected it. Once pain becomes conscious, it can recruit memory, language, fear, planning, and action. Once a thought becomes conscious, it can be evaluated, suppressed, repeated, spoken, or stored. Once a breath becomes conscious, its rhythm can be altered for a while. The same signal has different consequences depending on whether it remains local or becomes available to a wider set of systems. This is why the phrase "only in the mind" is misleading. A conscious interpretation can change the body's next state. A threatening thought can increase muscle tension and heart rate. A reassuring explanation can reduce defensive readiness. A remembered instruction can alter motor behavior. A decision to attend can bias sensory processing. None of these require consciousness to stand outside biology. They require conscious contents to have functional access to the systems that regulate biology. The brain therefore creates an unusual circular situation. It builds a model of the world. It builds a model of the body. It selects some information for conscious access. Then the selected information becomes part of the next model. A sensation becomes a concern. A concern becomes a plan. A plan changes attention. Attention changes perception. Perception changes action. Action changes the next sensory input. At no point does a non-physical commander need to enter the chain. But the chain does not behave like a simple bottom-up machine either. Predictive processing makes this circularity more concrete. The brain tries to reduce uncertainty by adjusting predictions or by acting in ways that make the world match the prediction. If you expect the room to be dark, you may reach for the light switch. If you expect a word to be misheard, you ask someone to repeat it. If you expect an uncomfortable sensation to become worse, the body may brace, and the bracing itself changes the sensation. The organism is not only interpreting the world, it is constantly sampling, shaping, and testing it. Perception and action are therefore coupled. The eyes move several times each second, gathering information from places the brain predicts will be useful. The hands explore objects by pressure and movement, not by waiting for touch to deliver a complete description. The ears track rhythm and direction. The body leans, adjusts, tightens, releases. Consciousness sits within this active loop, not at the end of a detached pipeline. This helps explain why deliberate practice changes experience. A musician hears structure in sound that once seemed undifferentiated. A radiologist sees patterns in an image that a novice misses. A climber feels small changes in balance through the feet and fingers. A meditator may notice stages of breathing or bodily sensation that were previously blurred. Practice changes the brain's predictions and the precision assigned to signals. What becomes conscious later depends on how the system has been trained to listen. But practice also reveals the limit. You cannot make every process conscious. The nervous system protects its own efficiency by keeping most operations beneath access. You can attend to the breath, but not to every chemical exchange that supports it. You can notice posture, but not every spinal reflex. You can choose a word, but not inspect every search operation that led to it. Conscious control is real, but partial. It works by influencing selected levels of a system that remains largely hidden. This partial control is not a weakness. It is the condition that makes coherent experience possible. A fully transparent brain might be unusable. To act, the organism needs compressed, relevant, timely information. Consciousness may be one way the brain makes certain contents available for flexible use across different systems. Not all processing needs that access. Some processes work better without it. Walking, speaking, reading, recognizing, and regulating posture all depend on countless operations that would become slower if consciousness had to approve each step. The familiar feeling of being a single self can hide this distributed labor. We say, "I decided," "I noticed," "I remembered," "I moved." These phrases are useful. They mark real events in experience, but beneath them The brain is running layered processes with different speeds and different degrees of access. A decision may involve value signals, motor preparation, memory, inhibition, emotion, prediction, and context before it becomes a conscious statement. By the time the statement appears, some of the work has already been done. This does not make the conscious statement meaningless. It can still change what happens next. Saying internally, "not now," can inhibit an impulse. Naming an emotion can alter the way it is regulated. Holding a goal in mind can bias attention over seconds or minutes. Consciousness may arrive after many preparatory processes, but once it arrives, it can become a new condition inside the system. The loop continues. The shift is quiet because it does not overthrow neuroscience. It makes neuroscience harder and more interesting. The brain is still physical. Conscious experience still depends on neural activity. Injury, sleep, anesthesia, development, and learning all show that the mind is bound to biological conditions. But the old straight line is too simple. Brain activity gives rise to conscious states, and conscious states, when they become available to attention, memory, language, and control, can alter the next pattern of brain activity. This means that consciousness is not best pictured as a lamp shining on a finished world. It is closer to a temporary organization of access inside a living predictive system. Some signals remain local, some are suppressed, some are amplified, some are corrected before they reach awareness, some cross into a field where they can guide speech, planning, memory, and deliberate action. The conscious moment is not everything the brain is doing. It is what the brain has made usable in a special way. The ordinary scene around you is therefore less ordinary than it appears. The sound of a sentence, the pressure of the body, the rhythm of breathing, the faint presence of the room, and the thought forming behind the next word are not separate pieces later glued together by a small inner observer. They are results of selection, prediction, correction, and feedback. They feel immediate because the machinery that makes them has hidden most of itself. If the brain is a city at night, consciousness is not a single light above it. It is the moment when one message becomes important enough to change traffic in several districts at once. A signal that was local becomes usable by memory. A bodily rhythm becomes available to attention. A prediction error becomes a question. A word becomes a decision. The city does not need a ruler outside its walls, but it does need ways for some events to become powerful beyond the place where they began. The unresolved question is not whether the brain is involved. It is involved at every level we can measure. The question is more exact and more difficult to escape. What decides which part of the brain's hidden work rises into the conscious world? Most of the work that holds the mind together never becomes visible from the inside. The brain stabilizes the image before the eyes, separates voice from noise, adjusts muscle tone, estimates the body's balance, prepares words before they reach the tongue, and filters thousands of internal signals before they can become a feeling. In one moment, there are more corrections, comparisons, and partial interpretations than awareness could ever contain. Yet out of that dense traffic, one content sometimes arrives with clarity, a sentence, a pain, a remembered name, a decision that feels like it belongs to you. The question is not only where that content was processed. A great deal can be processed without becoming conscious. The sharper question is when a signal stops being local and becomes available to the wider mind. A visual pattern may influence behavior without being reported. A bodily signal may adjust posture before it becomes discomfort. A word may be almost retrieved before it is known. The nervous system is full of near events, half-formed possibilities, and local calculations that never enter the central stream of experience. One influential way to describe this transition is the theory of a global workspace. It does not look for a single hidden room in the brain where consciousness sits. It asks when information becomes available to many systems at once. As long as a signal remains confined to a small specialized network, it may still do work. It can bias a reflex, prime a response, or slightly alter interpretation. But when that same signal becomes broadly accessible, it can be used by memory, speech, planning, evaluation, inhibition, and deliberate action. A library at night is a useful image, as long as the image returns to mechanism. Most rooms are active in darkness. One room sorts visual forms, another compares sounds, another prepares movement, another searches memory, another monitors the body's internal state. Most messages pass between nearby shelves and never reach the whole building. Then one message becomes important enough to be placed on the central board, not because it is magical, but because enough systems need it that it becomes available beyond its origin. In the brain, there is no literal board and no inner librarian. There are networks of neurons changing one another's activity. The phrase often used is broadcasting. Information becomes widely distributed so different processes can work with the same content. This does not mean consciousness is a radio signal sent from one small center. It means that a representation gains functional reach. It can now affect what is remembered, what is spoken, what is chosen, what is ignored, and what is prepared next. This helps explain a strange difference in everyday life. You may drive along a familiar route and only later realize that several turns were made with almost no conscious attention. The visual system, motor system, spatial memory, and prediction machinery were active. They were not absent. But much of the information stayed within routines that did not require global access. Then something unexpected happens. A pedestrian steps near the curb, a brake light flashes at the wrong moment. A horn breaks the predicted rhythm. Suddenly the scene becomes conscious in a different way. More systems are recruited. Memory, caution, motor inhibition, and planning converge on the same event. The same principle appears in smaller, quieter moments. A weak sensation in the shoulder may remain a local adjustment. The body shifts slightly. Muscles compensate. Posture changes without an account. But if the sensation grows or becomes meaningful, it enters a wider network. It connects with memory of injury, concern about tomorrow, the choice to rest, the word pain, and the decision to move differently. The physical signal may begin in tissue and nerves, but once it becomes conscious, its consequences are no longer confined to the body part where it began. The difference is functional. A hidden signal can alter one pathway. A conscious signal can reorganize many pathways at once. That is why the global workspace idea is powerful without solving everything. It does not fully explain why widely available information feels like something from the inside. It does not dissolve the difficulty of subjective experience, but it gives a mechanism for why conscious contents matter biologically. They are not merely images after the fact. They are contents that have become usable by many systems in the organism. Once a content enters this wider availability, it can guide flexible behavior across time. A forgotten word shows the process in a familiar form. You know the word is there, but it will not appear. Related words come close and fail. The first letter may almost arrive. The meaning is present without the sound. Beneath awareness, memory networks are testing associations, suppressing wrong candidates, and strengthening possible matches. Then the correct word appears all at once. It feels sudden because the final crossing into conscious access is sudden. The search was not sudden. This is a clue about the architecture of the mind. Consciousness does not contain all the work that produces it. It contains selected results, partial control signals, stable interpretations, and contents that can be held long enough to be used. If every stage of the word search became conscious, speech might not become clearer, it might become impossible. The mind would be crowded with unfinished fragments, false starts, phonetic shadows, and rejected meanings. Coherence requires exclusion. But exclusion creates its own problem. If the conscious field is narrow, how does it remain unified? The brain does not store vision, sound, movement, memory, emotion, and body state in one simple layer. They are distributed across specialized regions and connected by long and short pathways. When you see someone familiar walking toward you, the brain must combine face shape, body motion, distance, identity, emotional relevance, and possible response. You do not experience a face first, then a separate memory, then an emotion pasted beside it. you experience one person approaching. This is the binding problem, how separate features become a single conscious scene. Colour, shape, motion, location, and meaning can be processed by different neural populations, yet conscious perception does not usually present them as loose pieces drifting beside one another. It gives them together. A red object moves, a familiar voice speaks, a hand reaches, a room surrounds the body from one point of view. One possible part of the mechanism is timing. Neural systems do not only communicate by how strongly they fire, they also communicate through when they fire. If activity in different regions becomes coordinated in certain rhythms, signals may become more effective at influencing one another. Synchronization does not mean all neurons fire at once. That would be closer to seizure-like disorder than perception. The relevant idea is more delicate. Windows of excitability open and close. And distributed systems may temporarily align so information can be integrated. This gives the brain a time-based way to bind what space is separated. A feature processed in one region and a feature processed elsewhere may belong together if their activity participates in the same coordinated pattern. The binding is not a permanent glue. It is temporary, task-dependent, and constantly revised. The face recognized now is not stored forever as one fixed glow across the cortex. It is assembled through activity, prediction, memory, and attention, and then replaced by the next moment's organization. An orchestra can clarify the timing if the image is kept under control. The visual systems are not violins, and the auditory cortex is not a flute group, but the difficulty is similar. Many specialized parts must act with enough independence to do their own work and enough coordination to produce one event. If every group played without relation to the others, there would be noise. If every group played the same note at the same time, there would be no complexity. The living brain needs coordinated difference. This is one reason the unity of consciousness is not trivial. A single moment of experience feels smooth, but its machinery is distributed. The brain has to produce unity without becoming rigid. It must connect signals without freezing them. It must keep the scene stable while allowing attention to shift, body state to change, and predictions to update. A system too loose would fragment. A system too fixed would lose the ability to adapt. Some theories describe the brain as operating near a boundary between order and disorder. The idea is sometimes called criticality, or self-organized criticality, when the system naturally maintains itself near such a boundary. The claim should be handled carefully. It is not a magic explanation for consciousness, but it captures a real engineering pressure. The brain must be stable enough to preserve meaningful patterns and flexible enough to change those patterns quickly. Too much order can become repetition. Too much disorder can become incoherence. A waking mind depends on both. It needs the stability to know that a room remains a room when the eyes move. It needs the flexibility to notice that something in the room has changed. It needs memory to preserve identity across seconds, and sensitivity to let new information interrupt. Consciousness sits in that living compromise. It is not a frozen picture. It is an organized instability, held long enough to be useful. The simple idea of a central inner controller becomes less convincing here. Distributed systems can coordinate without a little person inside the head. Biological order often emerges from local interactions and feedback loops. Ant colonies, immune responses, heart rhythms, and developing tissues all show forms of organization that do not require a miniature supervisor. The brain, too, can form temporary coalitions of activity that stabilize for a task and dissolve when conditions change. Yet the opposite simplification also fails. If there is no inner supervisor, it does not follow that conscious contents have no organizing power. A goal held in mind can bias perception. A word of self-instruction can inhibit an action. A remembered rule can change behavior before the body moves. A sensation that becomes conscious can redirect attention and reshape the next prediction. Consciousness may not be a commander outside the system, but some conscious contents become control variables inside it. The orchestra image can now be adjusted. There may be no separate conductor standing above the players, but some musical themes, once introduced, alter the way the whole ensemble continues. A rhythm begun in one group can organize the entrance of others. A motif can return, be transformed, or suppress competing patterns. Conscious contents may work like that. They are produced by the system, but once produced, they help determine what the system does next. This dual character is difficult because ordinary language is built for simpler causes. We want to say either the brain controls the mind or the mind controls the brain, but living regulation often does not move in straight lines. It loops. The system produces a state, and the state changes the system. A conscious fear changes breathing. Changed breathing changes bodily signals. Bodily signals alter the next interpretation of threat. Interpretation changes attention. Attention selects new evidence, a circle forms, and the circle can tighten or loosen. As soon as the brain is seen this way, the skull stops looking like a clean boundary. The brain is not floating in isolation. It is immersed in the body. Every shift in breathing, blood pressure, heart rhythm, glucose level, muscle tension, inflammation, hormonal state, and organ signal changes the biological environment in which neural networks operate. Consciousness often feels as if it is located in the head, but its conditions are distributed through the organism. The body is not just a carrier for the brain, it is an active part of cognition. The direction of the eyes determines what information becomes available. Posture changes readiness for action. Tension in the jaw or shoulders can keep the nervous system closer to defensive preparation. A slow exhalation can help shift autonomic regulation and create a different condition for attention. Thinking does not happen in a sealed chamber above the body. It is braided into bodily rhythms. The term interoception describes the brain's sensing of the internal body. It includes obvious feelings such as hunger, thirst, nausea, heat, and pain. But it also includes quieter signals from the heart, lungs, stomach, intestines, muscles, blood vessels, and immune activity. Most of these signals never become clear sensations. Together, they shape the background tone of experience, whether the world feels open or tight, manageable or heavy, safe or loaded with possible threat. This background tone is not just mood in a vague sense, it is regulation. The brain must estimate the state of the body to decide what the organism can afford. Is there enough energy to act? Is this a moment for rest or defense? Should attention widen or narrow? Should movement prepare, digestion slow, breathing deepen, or muscles brace? Conscious experience is partly built on these estimates. The world does not arrive to a neutral observer. It arrives to a body already being regulated. The autonomic nervous system plays a central role in this. It controls many processes not usually directed by conscious will: heart rate, blood vessel constriction, sweating, digestion, pupil changes, and stress responses. Its branches are often simplified into activation and calming, although the real system is more complex. Sympathetic activity helps prepare the body for effort, defense, and rapid response. Parasympathetic influences support restoration, digestion, and flexible regulation. The conscious field changes depending on which bodily conditions dominate. A racing heart does not merely accompany fear after the fact. It becomes part of the information the brain must interpret. A tight chest, shallow breathing, and narrowed attention can make a neutral situation feel more urgent. Conversely, a body in a more regulated state may allow the same situation to be interpreted with more room. The external scene may be nearly unchanged, while the world available to consciousness has a different pressure. Heart rhythm itself is not a perfectly even metronome. The intervals between beats vary slightly. This variability, often called heart rate variability, can in certain contexts reflect how flexibly the body regulates itself. It is not a simple scoreboard of mental health, and it cannot reveal the whole person, but it shows that attention, emotion, breathing, and cardiovascular regulation are not separate worlds. They are linked through pathways that cross between brain and body. Breathing is the closest bridge between automatic process and conscious action. Most of the time it runs by itself. During sleep it continues without deliberate instruction. During speech it adjusts to phrase and rhythm. During effort it accelerates. Yet for a short time, attention can alter it. You can lengthen an exhale, pause briefly, breathe through the nose, or change the depth of inhalation. No other vital rhythm is so constantly automatic and so easily touched by intention. That makes breathing scientifically important, not mystical. When breathing changes, the body's internal signals change. Carbon dioxide levels, chest movement, vagal pathways, heart rhythm, and the timing of bodily feedback all shift. Slow breathing does not grant direct control over the whole nervous system. It is not a universal cure, but it can influence the regulatory conditions in which attention and emotion operate. A small conscious act enters a large automatic network. Here, the original paradox becomes physical again. A decision to attend to the breath is a brain process, but that process changes the breath. The changed breath changes signals returning to the brain. Those returning signals alter arousal, attention, and emotional tone. The result is not mind over matter. It is matter organized into loops that include subjective access. Conscious intention does not float above physiology. It acts through physiology. This is why a calm body can sometimes make a thought easier to release, and why a strained body can make the same thought grip harder. The content of the thought may not change at first. The sentence in the mind may be identical, but the body supplies a different background prediction. Danger, urgency, exhaustion, readiness, safety. A thought entering a defended body does not have the same weight as a thought entering a regulated one. The gut adds another layer. Digestion is not a simple mechanical process hidden below the important work of the brain. The gut has dense neural regulation and communicates with the brain through nerve pathways, immune signals, hormones, and microbial metabolites. The gut-brain axis is biological infrastructure, not a poetic label. It helps explain why hunger, nausea, inflammation, stress, and digestive state can change mood, attention, and the sense of being at home inside the body. The influence is not a one-way command from gut to mind. It is another loop. Stress can change digestion. Digestive discomfort can change attention. Inflammation can alter energy and mood. Anticipation can tighten the stomach before an event occurs. The conscious self often receives only the final tone. Unease, heaviness, restlessness, calm, appetite, fatigue. Beneath that tone, many systems have already been speaking. This should make the ordinary phrase "I feel like myself" more precise and less simple. The feeling of self is not only a thought about personal identity, it is also a regulated bodily condition. It depends on stable signals from muscles, skin, organs, balance, memory, and prediction. When these signals shift strongly, the sense of self can shift with them. Illness, exhaustion, panic, grief, anesthesia, intoxication, and sleep deprivation do not merely add unpleasant content to consciousness. They can alter the structure in which content appears. The body can be imagined as a quiet ocean under the surface of thought. Each breath, heartbeat, contraction, release, hormonal change, immune signal, and digestive movement creates currents that attention rides upon. The image is gentle, but the mechanics are concrete. The brain has to estimate the internal ocean continuously, because survival depends on it. Consciousness is not just a picture of the inner and outer world. It is part of the regulation of an organism that must keep itself alive. Embodied cognition begins from this fact. Thinking is not detached from movement, perception, bodily possibility, and environment. To understand space, the brain uses a body that can move through space. To understand action words, motor systems may be subtly involved. To feel emotion, the brain does not simply read an abstract label. It interprets bodily changes and prepares regulation. The eye of experience is not sealed inside cortex alone. It forms in a dynamic loop between brain, body, and world. This loop has a strong consequence. If the body changes, the conditions of consciousness can change. Not absolutely, not at will, not always enough, but measurably. Upright posture can change readiness. Regular movement can alter stress regulation. Sleep changes emotional stability and attention. Slower breathing can shift arousal. Light, temperature, hunger, fatigue, and pain can change what thoughts become sticky. and what perceptions seem important. Bodily interventions are not decorations around psychology, they're inputs to the regulatory network. The reverse is equally important. Conscious state changes the body. Worry about a future event can speed the heart before anything has happened. Attention to pain can increase its urgency. A sense of safety can relax muscles and change breathing. The decision to stand and leave prepares movement, shifts attention, and mobilizes energy. Brain, body, and consciousness cannot be arranged into a single straight line. They form a circuit in which each changes the conditions of the others. Meditation became scientifically interesting because it works inside this circuit in an unusually clean way. Not as proof of a mind separate from matter, and not as a miraculous technique, but as a repeated training of attention, awareness, and regulation. A person sits, stands, walks, or lies down, and returns attention to a chosen object. Breath, bodily sensation, sound, movement, or the changing field of experience itself. From the outside, little may happen. Inside, the system practices selection, detection, return, and release. The ordinary nature of the practice is exactly what makes it useful. It does not require a new sensory world. It uses what is already present: breathing, body, thought, emotion, sound, attention. When the mind wanders, the task is not to create perfect silence. The task is to notice that wandering has happened and return. That moment of noticing matters, is a conscious event that detects a change in mental state and alters the next direction of processing. A mind that wanders is not broken. Wandering is a normal expression of the brain's predictive and associative machinery. Memory, planning, unresolved concerns, imagined futures, language fragments, bodily sensations, and emotional priorities all compete for access. In meditation, the practitioner does not stop this machinery by force. Instead, the training repeatedly changes the relationship to it. A thought can appear without automatically becoming the next path. A sensation can be known without immediately turning into an account. Mechanically, this involves attention, monitoring, salience detection, and control. The brain must detect that attention has drifted. It must mark the drift as relevant without treating it as an emergency. It must disengage from the current content and restore the chosen object. Over many repetitions, the practice loop may become more efficient. The interesting point is not that consciousness dominates the brain. It is that conscious noticing can become a trained regulatory event within the brain's own dynamics. Consider the difference between being lost in a thought and knowing that a thought is present. In the first case, the content may occupy the workspace so completely that the world is interpreted through it. In the second, the thought remains available, but it is not identical with the whole field. This subtle shift can change emotion, attention, and bodily reaction. The thought has not been erased. Its grip has changed because its position in the system has changed. That shift is one of the most delicate forms of conscious regulation. It does not work like a switch. It often fails. It depends on fatigue, stress, practice, environment, and the intensity of the content. But when it works, the physical consequence is real. A worry that would have driven breathing and muscle tension for minutes may be seen earlier. A pain signal may be interpreted with less fear. A reaction may be delayed long enough for another response to become possible. The brain's salience networks are important here because they help decide what deserves priority. Salience is not the same as intensity. A loud sound can be irrelevant. A quiet word can matter deeply. A small bodily sensation can be ignored or become central depending on context. Systems involving regions such as the insula and anterior cingulate are often discussed in relation to internal awareness, error detection, and the shifting of attention. These are not isolated consciousness buttons. They are parts of a larger regulatory architecture that helps determine what becomes important. If salience is misweighted, conscious life can become distorted. Too much priority given to threat can make neutral signals feel dangerous. Too much priority given to internal discomfort can make the body dominate awareness. Too little priority given to important signals can make a person miss what needs care. The brain must constantly tune what matters, and that tuning is shaped by learning, body state, and current goals. Conscious training may influence this tuning, but it does not control it without limits. This matters for pain. Pain is not a simple readout of tissue damage. It is a protective experience constructed from sensory input, prediction, context, emotion, attention, and meaning. Tissue signals matter enormously, but the brain also asks what the signal means for the organism. Is this harmless pressure, fatigue, injury, danger, or uncertainty? Attention and expectation can amplify or soften pain because they change the model in which the signal is interpreted. That does not make pain imaginary. It makes pain biological. A fire alarm is not less real because it depends on a detection system. Pain is real as an experience and real in its consequences, even when its intensity is shaped by context. This is why fear can increase suffering, why understanding can sometimes reduce it, and why chronic pain can persist even after the original tissue state no longer fully explains the experience. The protective system itself can become sensitized. In this sense, consciousness is both vulnerable and powerful. Vulnerable because it is shaped by hidden bodily predictions it did not choose. Powerful because once certain contents become conscious, they can be reinterpreted, named, shared, investigated, and sometimes regulated. A sensation that is only endured may narrow the mind. A sensation that is noticed with precision may reveal texture, location, rhythm, and change. That precision can modify the next prediction. The signal is still there, but its meaning may no longer be identical to threat. Emotions follow a similar pattern. An emotion is not just a private word attached to a thought. It involves bodily preparation, perception, memory, action tendency, and appraisal. Anger may prepare approach and confrontation. Fear may prepare escape or freezing. Sadness may change energy and social signaling. Joy may widen exploration. These descriptions are broad, and real emotions are more mixed than labels suggest, but the principle holds. Emotion is a whole organism state interpreted through the brain. The conscious feeling of emotion may arrive after bodily preparation has already begun. You may notice your voice tightening before you can name irritation. You may feel the stomach drop before the thought, "I am anxious," becomes clear. You may recognize grief not as a single idea, but as weight, slowed movement, altered attention, and memories gaining unusual force. The mind does not merely observe these bodily changes, it participates in interpreting and regulating them. Naming an emotion can sometimes change it because the label becomes a conscious content available to language, memory, and control. The label does not dissolve the body state by magic, but it can shift the system from raw immersion to modelled awareness. Fear is not the same neural and bodily condition as being silently consumed by fear without recognition. The difference may be small in a strong state, but small differences in regulation can change what happens next. This brings the investigation back to the global workspace from another direction. A bodily signal becomes conscious when it becomes available to more systems. A feeling becomes nameable. A name becomes part of regulation. A regulated state changes the next bodily signal. The same loop that helps us perceive a sound or retrieve a word also helps construct the sense of being an embodied self. Consciousness is not only about seeing the outer world, it is about giving the organism usable access to its own condition. Yet the access is incomplete. We do not directly know blood chemistry, immune signaling, gut motility, or the precise balance of autonomic pathways. We receive feelings, urges, tones, and interpretations. The body speaks to consciousness through compressed summaries: hunger, unease, fatigue, calm, pain, warmth, breathlessness. These are not raw data. They are regulatory meanings. They tell the organism what might need action. A strange consequence follows. The conscious self is built partly from signals it cannot fully inspect. It feels intimate, but much of its source remains beneath access. You can feel uneasy without knowing whether the main driver is memory, lack of sleep, inflammation, social threat, shallow breathing, or a prediction built from all of them at once. The experience is real. The explanation may be hidden. That gap is one reason the mind can misread itself. The brain often turns bodily state into an account. A tight chest may become a belief that something is wrong. Fatigue may become pessimism. Hunger may sharpen irritation. Safety may make a difficult task seem possible. The picture is not necessarily false, but it may be incomplete. A conscious thought can carry the flavour of the body state that produced it. The mind may then mistake that flavour for evidence about the world. This is not a defect added onto an otherwise pure system. It is part of how a living organism works. The brain has to infer causes from ambiguous signals. It cannot pause life to run a perfect diagnostic. It must decide quickly whether the body is tired, threatened, sick, excited, lonely, hungry, or ready. Consciousness receives these decisions as feelings and meanings, often before their sources are clear. The scientific tension has changed. The earlier problem began with attention changing the brain. The deeper layer shows that attention changes the brain partly because the brain is regulating a body. A conscious moment is not just a neural display, it is a control surface inside a living loop. Sensory information, prediction, bodily condition, salience, memory and action all press into it. What rises into awareness can change what the organism does next. And what the organism does next changes what can rise into awareness. This does not make consciousness unlimited, it makes it situated. A person cannot simply decide to be calm in every condition. They cannot choose away grief, pain, exhaustion, panic, or illness by pure command. But conscious regulation can sometimes change the path through those states. It can notice earlier, it can name more accurately, it can slow a breath, shift posture, seek help, inhibit an action, or reinterpret a signal. Those are modest powers compared with fantasy. They are enormous compared with passivity. The first clean shift is that consciousness is not just the end of a bottom-up chain. The second is that consciousness is not only in the brain in the narrow sense, it depends on the body that feeds the brain its internal world. Breath, heart, gut, muscle, immune state, hormones and movement are not background scenery. They are part of the conditions from which the conscious field is built. Still, one difficult question remains open at this boundary. If conscious noticing can train attention, and attention can tune bodily and neural regulation, how far can this loop be strengthened before it meets the limits of automatic life? The loop can be trained, but not in the way simple language suggests. Conscious attention does not grab the nervous system like a hand on a lever. It does not reach down into the brainstem and command the body to obey. What it can do is narrower, slower, and more interesting. It can repeat the same act of selection until the system begins to change the probabilities of its own future states. A single moment of attention is fragile. It rises, holds briefly, and is interrupted by sensation, memory, emotion, sound, prediction, or fatigue. Anyone who has tried to rest attention on the breath knows how quickly the mind leaves. It moves toward a plan, an irritation, a phrase, an unfinished exchange, a bodily discomfort, a small image that appears without being invited. Then, sometimes, there is noticing. Attention has wandered. The chosen object has been lost. A new act begins. Return. That return is not dramatic from the outside. No one watching the body would see much more than stillness, small movements of breathing, perhaps a slight shift in posture. But from the nervous system's perspective, the return is a regulatory event. A system that had been captured by one stream detects the capture, marks it as relevant, disengages, and reorients. It is a small correction, repeated many times. The correction itself becomes part of what is being trained. This is why meditation is often misunderstood when it is described as emptying the mind. The brain does not become empty. It continues to predict, associate, remember, monitor, and adjust the body. The practice is not the destruction of mental activity. It is the repeated recognition of mental activity as mental activity. A thought appears, but it does not have to become the whole world. A sensation rises, but it does not automatically become danger. A sound enters, but does not have to pull the entire system after it. In that difference, the mechanism becomes visible. The content may remain almost the same. The relationship to the content changes. A worry about tomorrow can appear as a complete reality, filling the body with urgency before anything has happened. Or it can appear as a prediction, an account the brain is running in order to prepare. The first condition recruits the organism as if the imagined event were already present. The second creates a little space around the prediction. The thought still has meaning. It may even contain useful information. But it is no longer identical with the whole field of consciousness. That shift requires metacognition, the capacity to know something about one's own mental state. Metacognition is not a separate inner person watching the mind. It is a set of processes by which the brain represents aspects of its own activity. You can know that you are uncertain. You can notice that attention has drifted. You can recognize that a memory is incomplete, that an emotion is rising, that a thought is repetitive, that a perception might be biased by fear. The system models part of itself. This self-modeling is imperfect. It can be wrong. People can feel certain and be mistaken, feel calm while the body is tense, or believe they chose freely when much of the preparation happened outside awareness. But the imperfection does not make metacognition useless. A map can be incomplete and still guide movement. A brain that can represent its own uncertainty, distraction, or emotional capture gains a new route for control. It can adjust not only to the outer world, but to its own internal dynamics. The physical consequence is subtle but important. Without metacognition, a thought has only its content. With metacognition, the thought also has a status. It can be seen as memory, fear, plan, image, interpretation, or possibility. That status changes how widely the thought spreads through the system. A fear treated as immediate evidence may drive attention toward threat. A fear recognized as a prediction may still be taken seriously, but it may not command the entire body. This is not philosophy floating above the brain. It is regulation by classification. The same neural content can be handled differently when the system assigns it a different role. A sensation can be pain, pressure, fatigue, warmth, vibration, or injury signal, depending on context and interpretation. A thought can be command, memory, fantasy, plan, or noise. Conscious labeling does not create perfect control, but it can alter the route a signal takes through attention, emotion, and action. This is one reason certain meditative practices have attracted scientific attention. They offer a repeated, observable training of attention and metacognition. The person attends, loses the object, notices, returns, and gradually learns to detect mental events earlier. Studies vary in design and strength, and not all claims about meditation are equally supported. But several areas appear repeatedly in research interest: attention, emotional regulation, bodily awareness, metacognition, and patterns of self-referential thought. The careful claim is not that meditation changes every person in the same way. It is not that sitting quietly automatically produces wisdom, health, or permanent calm. The narrower result is already enough. Conscious training can be regular enough to leave measurable traces. Attention is not merely a passing beam. When repeated, it can become practice, and practice is one of the ways a biological system rewires its own future tendencies. Neuroplasticity is the broad name for the nervous system's capacity to change with activity. It includes changes in synaptic strength, network efficiency, sensory maps, motor patterns, and functional coordination. A violinist's fingers, a reader's visual language networks, a taxi driver's spatial memory, a person recovering movement after injury, and someone learning to regulate attention, all show variations of the same principle. Repeated patterns of use can shape the system that produces later experience. Plasticity does not mean the brain can become anything. Biology has constraints. Age, injury, genetics, stress, sleep, environment, and the intensity of training all matter. Some circuits change easily, others resist. Some changes help, others can trap the system in pain, fear, craving, or rumination. Plasticity is not automatically good. It means the nervous system is history sensitive. What it does repeatedly tends to become easier to do again. This makes attention physically consequential. The object of attention is not merely what is lit in the moment. It is part of what the brain practices becoming sensitive to. Repeated threat monitoring trains one kind of world. Repeated careful observation trains another. Repeated self-criticism can strengthen certain loops of evaluation and bodily contraction. Repeated return to a neutral bodily rhythm can train detection, disengagement, and regulation. The mind is not sculpted by attention alone, but attention is one tool by which the system participates in its own sculpting. One of the networks often discussed in this context is the default mode network. It tends to be more active during mind-wandering autobiographical reflection, imagining the future, remembering the past, and thinking about oneself in relation to time. It is not a bad network. It is not a mistake in the brain. Without it, planning, personal memory, social imagination, and the continuity of identity would be deeply impaired. The problem begins when its activity becomes too absorbing. When the inner narrative presents itself not as a model, but as the only available world. A person lying awake at night may not be reacting to the room. The room is still, the body is tired, the lights are low, yet the mind builds scenes, conversations replay, futures are simulated, mistakes become vivid, possible losses acquire weight. The body may respond as if something is happening now because the brain's predictive machinery is generating a world that the body must regulate around. The default mode network helps make this possible, but it should not be treated as a villain. The same ability that traps attention in worry also allows a person to imagine tomorrow, understand another person's perspective, revise a memory, or create a plan. The issue is not whether inner narration exists. The issue is whether the system can recognize narration as narration when recognition is needed. Some meditative training seems to work partly by changing the relationship to this stream, not by destroying self-related thought, but by making it more detectable. A memory begins, and it is known as remembering. A future scene begins, and it is known as imagining. A judgment begins, and it is known as judging. In these moments, the content does not necessarily disappear. Its authority changes. It no longer has to occupy the full workspace without being seen. Here, the difference between a state and a trait becomes important. A short practice session can change the current state of the system. Breathing may slow, bodily awareness may sharpen, reactivity may soften, and the density of thought may temporarily decrease. That is like weather. It matters, but it passes. Long-term training may gradually change traits. How quickly distraction is noticed, how easily attention returns, how flexibly emotion is handled, how strongly automatic narratives capture the system. That is more like the shape of the land through which weather moves. The land changes slowly. One act of attention is like one drop of water on stone. It leaves no visible mark. 10 drops leave no channel, but repeated direction, the same return, the same gentle detection of capture, can eventually alter the path along which the mind most often flows. The image is not proof. The proof has to come from measurement and behavior, but it captures the timescale of training better than the fantasy of instant transformation. The stronger claims have to be narrowed. Meditation is not a universal treatment. It can be difficult, unhelpful, or even destabilizing for some people in some conditions. The nervous system is not a simple machine that always improves when attention is turned inward. Trauma, anxiety, depression, pain, and dissociation can make internal focus complicated. Scientific honesty matters here because the mechanism is powerful enough to require care. Training attention means changing access to signals, and some signals are not gentle when they first become clear. But the existence of limits does not erase the mechanism. It makes it more concrete. A practice that changes salience, bodily awareness, and metacognitive access will not affect every system in the same way. It will depend on what is already sensitized, what the body predicts, what the person has learned, and what support is available. The brain is plastic, but plasticity follows conditions. A useful comparison is physical training. Strength training does not simply make the body better in every direction. It depends on load, recovery, technique, nutrition, injury, and consistency. Too little stress changes little. Too much stress damages tissue. The right pattern, repeated with recovery, changes capacity. Attention training has a similar biological humility. The goal is not maximum force, it is repeated regulation at a level the system can integrate. This helps separate real practice from mystical exaggeration. A person returning attention to the breath is not escaping the brain. The person is using one part of the organism's regulation to influence another. The prefrontal systems involved in monitoring and control, the insula involved in internal bodily awareness, salience networks that help mark importance, sensory areas, autonomic regulation, memory and emotional circuits all participate in different ways depending on the practice. There is no single meditation center, there is a changing pattern of networks. That pattern can be studied from outside, but it is lived from inside. The inner event may be quiet, the recognition that a thought has pulled attention away. The outer measurement may show changes in activity, connectivity, or behavior. Neither perspective replaces the other. The subject knows the feel of noticing. The scientist measures the conditions and consequences of that noticing. The tension between first-person report and third-person measurement remains. But now it has a mechanism to work through. Metacognition also changes the question of agency. If a thought appears before it is chosen, what does it mean to choose? The brain constantly offers material to consciousness, urges, images, words, emotional tones, bodily impulses, possible actions. Many arrive without invitation. A person does not choose the first flicker of irritation, the sudden memory, the half-formed phrase, the pull toward distraction. But agency may begin not at the birth of every impulse, but in how the system handles impulses once they become available. A hand reaches toward a phone before the decision is fully verbal. A snack is considered before hunger is examined. A sharp reply forms before restraint appears. In each case, preparation precedes conscious control. But if the impulse becomes conscious early enough, the system may still alter the outcome. The movement can be inhibited. The breath can slow. The wording can change. The action can be delayed until another model of the situation comes online. The timing is crucial. Consciousness often does not initiate the first wave. It may intervene in later waves. This can feel humbling, because it weakens the simple image of the self as absolute origin, but it also protects a more realistic form of responsibility. Human action is not usually a pure command emerging from nothing. It is layered regulation. Some layers prepare without awareness, some become conscious. Some are shaped by habit, body state, social meaning and memory. Some can be trained. The self is not a point outside the chain. It is a pattern within the chain that can learn to influence future links. Experiments on decision-making have long complicated the picture of free will. Neural preparation for movement can sometimes be detected before a person reports the conscious intention to move. These findings are often overstated in popular discussion. They do not prove that all conscious choice is an illusion. They do show that conscious intention is not always the first event in the causal sequence. The brain may begin preparing possibilities before the self narrates the decision. The safer and more useful interpretation is not that no one chooses anything. It is that choosing is distributed across time. Some preparation is unconscious. Some evaluation becomes conscious. Some inhibition or correction occurs after an impulse begins. Some choices are shaped over months by habits that change which impulses arise in the first place. Agency is less like a spark and more like a regulating pattern extended across seconds, days, and years. This matters because the conscious mind often claims ownership too late and too simply. It says, "I decided," compressing a chain of bodily state, memory, cue, prediction, emotional valuation, motor preparation and social meaning into one smooth sentence. The sentence is not useless. It may be the right summary for everyday life, but scientifically the summary hides the machinery. The decision is not less real because it has parts, it is more physical. A person learning to pause before reacting is not creating freedom out of nothing. They are altering the timing of access. They are learning to notice the impulse earlier, represent it more accurately, keep it in the workspace without immediately acting, and allow competing information to arrive. The pause is not empty. It is an active biological interval. During it, motor preparation can be inhibited, emotional intensity can shift, and a broader model of consequence can influence action. That small interval may be one of the most important spaces consciousness creates. Not a space outside causality, but a space inside the organism where more causes can meet. The immediate impulse, the remembered value, the expected consequence, the bodily state, the social context, and the chosen goal can all become available together. A purely automatic system acts on the strongest prepared tendency. A conscious regulatory system can sometimes hold several tendencies long enough for a different action to win. The word win matters because there is still competition. Signals compete for access, and actions compete for execution. Attention does not remove competition, it changes the weights. A goal held in mind can strengthen one pathway. A remembered rule can inhibit another. A bodily cue can add urgency. A social cue can shift meaning. The conscious field is a place where competing models can be compared, but comparison itself is a biological process. This makes the mind less sovereign and more capable at the same time. Less sovereign because it is not the untouched ruler of the body. More capable because it can influence the future by training the conditions under which future impulses arise. A person cannot choose every thought, but repeated choices can change the landscape from which thoughts emerge. A person cannot command emotion never to rise, but they can sometimes change how quickly emotion is recognized, how it is interpreted, and what action follows. In that sense, the self is partly a memory of previous regulation. Habits are stored histories. Attention patterns are stored histories. Emotional reactions are stored histories. Even posture carries history in the nervous system's expectations about action and defense. What feels like me in the present is often the current expression of many past loops that became easier to run. Conscious practice matters because it inserts new repetitions into that history. Creativity also belongs to this same mechanism. A creative idea often feels like a gift arriving from nowhere. It appears during a walk, in the shower, at the edge of sleep, while looking away from the problem. The conscious self may have struggled, failed, and stopped. Then the answer arrives with the strange authority of suddenness. It feels unmade because the making happened mostly outside conscious access. But creative insight is not magic entering the brain. It is the brain reorganizing material. Memory, perception, language, motor patterns, emotional tone, and unresolved goals continue to interact when direct effort relaxes. The system may test combinations that would be rejected too early under tight control. It may weaken a false assumption, connect to distant representations, or shift the frame in which a problem is being held. When the new configuration becomes stable enough, it crosses into awareness as an aha. Insight problem solving shows that not every problem is solved by adding steps in a straight line. Sometimes the existing frame is the obstacle. A person keeps searching in the wrong space because the brain has represented the problem in a way that makes the solution invisible. Then the representation changes. What looked irrelevant becomes useful. What looked impossible becomes simple. Consciousness experiences the change as sudden. But the underlying system may have been rearranging constraints for some time. This is another pressure point for the idea of conscious control. Too much control can narrow the search. Too little control can dissolve the goal. Creativity often needs both. One mode generates associations, images, phrases, movements, and partial patterns. Another mode evaluates them, tests them, edits them, and makes them usable. Without freedom, there are too few possibilities. Without control, the possibilities do not become work. Brain networks reflect this balance in changing ways. The default mode network can support spontaneous association and internally generated material. Executive control networks can support evaluation, planning, and refinement. Salient systems may help shift between generation and selection when something becomes promising. Creativity is not simply the release of control, it is the timing of control. The mind must loosen enough for unusual combinations to form, then tighten enough to shape them. This is why forced effort sometimes fails at the edge of a problem. The person keeps applying the same strategy, strengthening the same frame, returning to the same blocked path. The harder the push, the more dominant the wrong model becomes. Then attention softens, the body moves, the environment changes, a different cue appears. The system is still holding the problem but less rigidly. A weak association that would have been suppressed now has time to grow. A useful image is a harbour at night. During the day, every boat is directed by schedule, signal, task, and route. At night, the water keeps moving beneath the strict pattern. Ropes loosen slightly, reflections shift. A vessel that seemed fixed is now seen in relation to another light. The new path was not created by darkness. It became visible when the control pattern changed. Insight often works this way. The material was present, but the organizing frame had to relax before another relation could be seen. Some discussions of creativity use the phrase transient hypofrontality, a temporary reduction in certain forms of frontal control. The phrase has to be used cautiously. Creativity is not simply turning off the front of the brain. Frontal systems are essential for planning, selection, inhibition, and completion. A painting, proof, poem, design, diagnosis, or melody does not become finished because control disappears, but the distinction between generating and judging is useful. A brain that judges too early can kill fragile combinations before they acquire shape. Dreaming and half-sleep reveal a more extreme form of loose recombination. During dreams, the brain can mix memory, emotion, imagery, fear, desire, and fragments of recent experience without the usual grip of external reality testing. Most dreams are not brilliant. Many are chaotic, ordinary, or quickly forgotten, but their strange logic shows what the brain can do when some waking filters are relaxed. It can combine remote material, bend identity, shift location, and treat symbolic relations as if they were immediate perception. The edge of sleep is especially revealing because consciousness thins without disappearing at once. Images appear without deliberate construction. Words detach from intention. Sounds from the room may be woven into internal scenes. The sense of voluntary authorship weakens. The mind becomes less like a spotlight and more like a surface on which fragments rise. Yet even here, the fragments come from the organism's own history. The brain is not receiving messages from nowhere. It is rearranging what it has lived, learned, feared, desired, and predicted. Creativity uses this capacity in a more disciplined form. It allows hidden processing to continue, but later brings the result into conscious space where it can be tested. The unfinished melody must be heard again. The mathematical idea must survive proof. The scientific hypothesis must face measurement. The sentence must be revised. Consciousness is not always the source of the idea, but is often where the idea is inspected, stabilized, and made communicable. The fish rising from dark water is a precise image here, if it is not overextended. When the surface is constantly disturbed by force, nothing below can be seen clearly. When attention softens, something may appear. But the fish did not come into existence at the moment it broke the surface. It had been moving below for some time. Insight enters consciousness only when enough hidden work has formed a pattern the global workspace can catch, hold, test, and use. This makes creative authorship more layered than it feels. Who creates the idea? The conscious self that held the question? The unconscious networks that combined material? The body that changed rhythm and arousal enough for a different state? The memory systems that supplied fragments? The learned language that gave the idea shape? The culture that provided symbols, tools, problems, and standards? The answer is not one figure in a dark room. An idea passes through layers, some conscious and some not, before it can be called one's own. The same layered process appears in scientific discovery at a smaller human scale. A researcher may spend years learning methods, failures, instruments, equations, and patterns of error. When a new interpretation appears, it may feel sudden. But suddenness is not the absence of history. It is the crossing of a threshold after history has prepared the ground. The mind recognizes a relation because many previous relations have trained it to see what matters. A musician improvising does not choose each note from an empty menu. The fingers carry practice sequences. The ear predicts tension and release. The body knows timing. Memory supplies patterns absorbed over years. Attention listens to what has just happened and prepares what could follow. The conscious self may guide the direction, but it cannot micromanage every event without destroying the flow. The performance depends on trained automaticity and conscious steering working together. Flow states reveal the same balance. In skilled action, self-monitoring may become quieter while perception and movement couple more tightly. A climber reads the surface through fingers and feet. A surgeon adjusts to tissue resistance. A dancer responds to timing before verbal thought catches up. A writer follows a sentence that seems to know its own next turn. Flow is not unconsciousness. It is a state in which control becomes distributed through trained perception and action, with less need for constant verbal oversight. The danger is to romanticize this and imagine that the best mind is always the least controlled mind. That is not true. Flow depends on skill, feedback, and constraints. Without training, loosened control may produce noise. Without feedback, confidence may drift away from accuracy. Without later evaluation, the idea may remain private and untested. The nervous system needs both hidden generation and conscious correction. The strongest creative work often comes from their alternation. The wider pattern is now clear enough to disturb the simple picture. Consciousness is not the single author of every thought. It is not merely a passive witness either. It is a mode of access and regulation inside a brain-body system that also learns from its own repetitions. It can notice, label, hold, inhibit, return, soften, select, and test. It can change the future not by ruling every process, but by altering the conditions under which future processes unfold. This is a more modest picture than the myth of total control, and a more powerful picture than the myth of helpless observation. It allows the mind to be physical without being trivial. It allows unconscious work to be real without making the conscious self irrelevant. It allows the body to shape thought without reducing thought to a simple bodily reflex. It allows practice to matter without promising unlimited transformation. The next boundary is harder because it removes the last comfortable isolation. If attention is trained through repetition, if language shapes inner narration, if creativity uses shared symbols, and if emotion is regulated through voice, touch, expression, and timing, then the conscious self was never formed alone. The private mind has a social architecture. Its inner voice once came from outer voices. Its attention was first guided by another person's gaze. Its emotions learned rhythm in the presence of other nervous systems. If consciousness can be trained from within, how much of that within was built between people before it ever felt private? A private mind is never built in private. Before there is an inner voice, there are outer voices. Before attention feels like something one person directs alone, it is guided by a face, a pointing hand, a change in tone, a shared look toward the same object. A child does not learn the world only by receiving light, sound, and touch. The child learns what to notice because another nervous system repeatedly marks parts of the world as meaningful. A bird on a branch becomes more than a moving shape when an adult points and names it. The finger is not important only as a direction in space. It creates a small field of shared attention. The child sees the bird but also begins to register that another person is seeing it too, that the object can be named, that interest can be shared, that the same piece of the world can become common ground between minds. Conscious attention is social before it becomes private habit. This matters because human consciousness includes meanings that no single brain invents alone. Words, gestures, emotional expressions, rules, promises, warnings, stories, and rituals are not stored in the air as invisible forces. They move through bodies. They change breathing, posture, gaze, memory, expectation, and action. The brain is biological, but its models of the world are trained inside a social environment that constantly tells it what matters. In conversation, two people often begin to coordinate without deciding to do so. The pace of speech shifts. Pauses begin to fit together. Facial expressions are subtly mirrored. Breathing may change with the rhythm of another voice. One person's tension can make the room feel tighter. Another person's calm can create space for a thought that was not available a moment before. None of this requires a paranormal connection. It requires signals moving through ordinary channels: sound, movement, timing, expression, touch, and prediction. Social neuroscience studies this border where one nervous system becomes relevant to another. It asks how the brain processes gaze, intention, emotion, gesture, movement, and social meaning. Mirror neuron systems are often mentioned here, though they should not be treated as a simple key to empathy or imitation. The more careful point is narrower and still important. When we observe another person acting, parts of our own action-related systems may become involved. Perception of another body is not entirely separate from the brain's own possibilities for movement. This helps explain why watching someone reach, flinch, smile, or struggle can feel immediate. The brain does not merely label the event from a distance. It uses internal models of body and action to interpret what is happening. When someone lifts a heavy object, the observer may understand effort partly because their own motor system knows something about weight and resistance. When someone is hurt, the observer's own systems related to discomfort may respond, even though no tissue has been damaged in the observer's body. Empathy begins in this kind of resonance, but it does not end there. To feel another person's pain as raw contagion can overwhelm rather than help. Compassion requires regulation. The brain must register distress, distinguish self from other, interpret context, and prepare a response that does not simply collapse into the other person's state. The social mind is not just a mirror. It is a regulating system that must stay connected while maintaining boundaries. Shared rhythm makes the same point in a different form. Speech has timing, music has timing, walking together has timing, work done in coordination has timing. Neural entrainment describes the brain's capacity to align aspects of its activity with external rhythms. In speech, this can help predict syllables, emphasis, and meaning. In music, it supports coordinated timing. In group action, repeated feedback between bodies can create a pattern no single person controls completely. A group singing together does not become one organism. Each person still has a separate metabolism, a separate brain, a separate stream of experience. But shared rhythm can coordinate attention, emotion, and movement. A choir breathes in relation to phrase and sound. A team adjusts to the motion of the group. A quiet room changes when one person begins speaking in a steady voice and others settle into the cadence. The collective event is real without becoming a single collective mind. The word coordination protects the science here. Without it, social consciousness can blur into fog. When people act together, there is no need to propose a hidden mental field passing through the walls. The known channels are already powerful. Gaze tells the brain where another mind is pointed. Voice carries emotion and rhythm. Gesture reveals intention. Rules and shared expectations reduce uncertainty. Feedback corrects behavior in real time. One brain becomes a signal source for another, and each brain also models the other as a model-making system. That is already strange enough. The mind that feels most private has been shaped by countless public signals. The voice that says, "I should wait," "I can try again," or "this matters," often carries the structure of voices first heard from others. Language enters from outside and becomes internal regulation. A child is guided by instruction, then repeats instruction aloud, then gradually turns it inward until it becomes thought. The private monologue is partly social speech folded back into the nervous system. This folding changes agency. A remembered phrase can inhibit an action. A learned rule can alter an impulse. A trusted person's voice, even absent, can change the way an event is interpreted. Social experience becomes neural structure, and neural structure becomes later self-control. The self is not less real because it has social origins. It is more deeply embodied in history. The boundary becomes sensitive when people move from social coordination to stronger claims. If brains can synchronize through rhythm, gaze, and shared attention, some ask whether intention might act at a distance, beyond ordinary communication. Claims about group meditation reducing crime, distant healing, human intention influencing random number generators, or minds affecting events without known physical channels appear in some discussions. These claims attract attention because they touch a deep human wish that mind may not be confined to the body's usual boundaries. Scientific care has to slow the movement right there. Some effects of shared practice are understandable through ordinary mechanisms. If a group regularly practices attention and emotional regulation, the members may sleep differently, react differently, communicate differently, and behave with more patience. If a community's stress decreases and social bonds improve, measurable changes in the local atmosphere of behavior may follow. That is not trivial. It simply does not require a non-local mind. Stronger claims need stronger evidence. If a study suggests that group meditation lowered crime in a city, many other possibilities must be examined. Seasonal variation, policing patterns, economic conditions, selection of data, statistical modelling choices, pre-registered hypotheses, and the risk of finding patterns only after looking through many possible outcomes. Correlation is not causation. Two things occurring in the same period do not prove that one caused the other. At this edge, the boundary between curiosity and overclaiming matters. The same caution applies to experiments involving random generators and human intention. When tiny deviations are sought inside enormous amounts of random data, patterns can appear convincing after the fact. A result may be interesting, but without strong replication, careful controls and clear mechanisms, it should not be treated as proof that thought reaches into physical systems directly. The safer claim is narrower. Human intention clearly changes the body and behavior of the person intending, and it can affect others through communication, action, and shared context. Beyond those channels, the evidence is much weaker. This narrowing does not make the subject smaller. It makes the real mechanism visible. A person's calm voice can slow another person's breathing. A warning can raise another person's vigilance. A group norm can change individual action. A ritual can organize expectation and attention. A teacher can shape what a student notices for years. A diagnosis can change the future not only through treatment, but through what the patient expects, fears, and understands. Meaning moves through biology, but it does not have to violate biology to matter. Expectation is the next form of that movement. It has no colour, weight, or temperature. It cannot be placed on a scale like a piece of tissue, yet expectation can change pain, stress, muscle tension, heart rhythm, attention, and chemical signalling in the nervous system. Not because a thought freely rewrites the body, because the brain treats expectation as a prediction about the body's future state, and prediction is one of the ways the brain regulates. The placebo effect is often misunderstood as if it means nothing happened. A person receives an inert pill, feels less pain, and the easy explanation is that the pain was imagined. That is too shallow. In some forms of placebo analgesia, the body's own pain-modulating systems can become involved, including endogenous opioids, chemicals produced by the body that can reduce pain signaling. The expectation of relief can translate into a real physiological change. That does not mean positive thinking cures serious disease. It does not mean medical care can be replaced by belief. It does not mean consciousness can command the immune system to remove any illness. The stronger version of that claim is not supported. The narrower claim is more trustworthy and still powerful. Meaning, context, expectation, trust, and previous experience can influence some physiological processes, especially where the brain already regulates pain, stress, attention, and bodily state. Pain is the clearest example because pain is not a passive reading from damaged tissue. When skin is injured, nerve endings send information about damage or possible damage. That information matters. But conscious pain is produced in the brain, where sensory input is combined with context, memory, fear, attention, and the meaning of the situation. The same physical input can hurt differently depending on whether the person expects danger, relief, control, or uncertainty. The brain has descending pathways that can dampen or amplify pain processing in the spinal cord and other parts of the nervous system. Top-down modulation is not an abstract phrase here. It is a physical regulation of signal flow. If the brain evaluates a situation as less threatening, some pain-related inputs may receive less weight. If the situation is judged as dangerous, their weight may increase. Expectation does not stand against biology. It enters through mechanisms biology already uses. The nocebo effect shows the darker side of the same loop. If a person expects harm, worsening, or pain, unpleasant symptoms can become more likely or more intense even when the physical stimulus has not increased. A warning about a side effect can sometimes raise the chance that the side effect is felt, not because the person is inventing it, but because the nervous system begins to monitor the body differently. Signals that would have stayed at the edge become urgent. Internal noise becomes a message. The physical reason is protective. An organism must predict threat before threat fully unfolds. If danger is expected, attention narrows, muscle tone changes, heart rate may rise, breathing shifts, and stress responses prepare the body for action. Often that is useful. A body that waited for perfect proof of danger would react too late. But the same mechanism can increase suffering when expectation overestimates risk. Expectation acts like an internal climate. It does not determine everything. It cannot erase tissue damage, stop every disease process, or make the body obey a preferred account. But it can influence whether the nervous system works under storm conditions or in steadier air. Stress hormones, autonomic regulation, sleep, immune signaling, pain, and muscular tension interact. When the expected state of the world changes for long enough, the body may not remain exactly the same. Psychoneuroimmunology studies these links between psychological processes, the nervous system, and immunity. It is an area easy to exaggerate into unsupported promises, but its basic question is scientific. How do stress, emotion, social connection, and meaning influence inflammation, hormonal regulation, and the body's defense systems? Chronic stress can alter immune function. Persistent threat perception can keep the body in a state that is useful in the short term and costly over time. A conscious meaning does not float outside physiology. It can gradually be translated into physiological pathways. Here, the predictive brain returns with a sharper edge. If the brain is constantly estimating what is happening and what will happen next, then the context around treatment is not decoration. The room, the clinician's confidence, the explanation, the patient's memory, the expected relief, the ritual of care, and the relationship of trust all become signals. They help the brain estimate whether the body is being helped, threatened, ignored, or protected. Those estimates can change regulation. This does not make medicine theatrical. It makes context part of medicine. A drug has pharmacology, a surgical procedure has physical effects, a therapy has technique. But around each of them, the brain interprets meaning. An effective treatment delivered in a frightening, confusing, or dismissive context may be experienced differently from the same treatment delivered with clarity and trust. The molecule matters. The meaning around the molecule can matter too. Especially for systems that depend on pain, stress, and expectation. The danger is turning this into blame. If expectation influences symptoms, it does not follow that sick people cause their illness by thinking incorrectly. That claim is scientifically careless and morally harmful. Bodies are shaped by genetics, infection, injury, aging, environment, trauma, chance, poverty, exposure, and many conditions far beyond conscious control. The role of expectation is one mechanism among many, not a verdict on the person. The more precise lesson is kinder and stronger. The nervous system is not sealed away from meaning. It listens to meaning as part of its model of what is happening. A clear explanation can reduce uncertainty. A trusted relationship can change threat prediction. A ritual of care can signal safety. A frightening expectation can increase monitoring and distress. Meaning becomes biological when the brain uses it to regulate the body. This returns the whole investigation to the first movement of attention. At the beginning, a decision to notice the breath changed what became prominent in the brain. Now the same principle has widened. Attention, expectation, language, social contact, memory, and bodily state all adjust the weights by which the brain interprets the world. Consciousness is not a detached witness. It is one layer in a living control system that predicts, selects, broadcasts, binds, regulates, learns, and re-enters its own future. Still, the deepest problem has not disappeared. We can describe global availability, we can describe predictive processing, we can describe bodily regulation, interoception, plasticity, social coordination, and top-down modulation. We can show why conscious contents have functional consequences. What remains harder is why any of this is felt from the inside. Why does a widely broadcast signal have the quality of pain, blue, effort, grief, breath, or recognition? Why is there something it is like to be this biological system as it regulates itself? This is the hard boundary. It does not cancel neuroscience. It prevents neuroscience from pretending it has already answered every part of the question. The brain mechanisms are real. They are measurable. They explain a great deal: how attention shifts, how expectation changes pain, how social signals shape regulation, how practice alters networks, how bodily state changes experience. But a full account of subjective feeling remains incomplete. The gap is not a license for fantasy. It is a marker of unfinished science and careful philosophy. Several theories try to approach it from different directions. Some emphasize integration, the idea that conscious experience depends on information being unified within a system rather than remaining as isolated fragments. Some emphasize global access. Information becomes conscious when it is available to many cognitive processes at once. Some emphasize recurrent processing. Signals must loop through feedback pathways rather than simply pass forward. Some emphasize predictive control and the organism's need to regulate itself in a changing world. These theories do not all say the same thing. They disagree about what is central. Is consciousness mainly a matter of access, integration, feedback, self-modeling, biological regulation, or some combination of these? A theory may explain report and behavior without explaining feeling completely. Another may try to explain intrinsic experience, but become harder to test. The scientific field is active because the target is difficult. Consciousness is not just an output to measure, but the condition under which measurement becomes meaningful to someone. Disorders of consciousness show how delicate the problem is. A person may be awake but not aware in the usual sense. Another may show minimal signs of awareness that are hard to detect from the outside. Brain injury can separate arousal from responsiveness, movement from intention, perception from report. These conditions force medicine and neuroscience to ask what evidence counts as consciousness when speech and movement are impaired. The answer cannot depend only on appearance. It must depend on careful measurement, behavior, and the structure of brain activity. Anesthesia sharpens the same question from another angle. A few molecules, delivered in the right concentration, can remove the world. The body continues to be monitored. The heart beats. The lungs may be assisted. Reflexes and physiology remain. But the continuous field of experience can vanish so completely that the person does not pass through darkness in memory. There is no experienced interval. Then, as the drug state changes, the world returns. Time has not felt long. It has simply not appeared. That fact is quiet and severe. A physical change in brain dynamics can remove conscious experience. Another physical change can restore it. This strongly binds consciousness to the brain, but it also intensifies the question: what exactly is lost when the world disappears under anesthesia? Not light itself, not sound waves, not the body as an organism. What disappears is availability from the inside, the constructed, felt, usable field in which a world and a self are present together. Sleep and dreaming add another variation. In deep sleep, experience may be minimal or absent. In dreams, the brain builds worlds with little external input. The body lies in one place while space, emotion, memory, and identity rearrange themselves. Dreaming shows that the brain can generate conscious scenes from the internal activity, but also that not all conscious scenes are equally anchored to the external world. Waking experience requires a more disciplined negotiation between prediction and correction. Dreaming loosens the correction. These states do not solve the mystery, but they give it edges. Consciousness depends on arousal, integration, feedback, bodily regulation, memory, and access. It can be narrowed, fragmented, distorted, suspended, or altered. It can be trained in some ways and overwhelmed in others. It can be socially shaped and chemically interrupted. It is intimate, but not untouchable. It is subjective, but not beyond measurement. A useful scientific picture therefore has to hold two truths at once. The first is that conscious experience depends on physical processes. Damage, development, sleep, drugs, oxygen, glucose, hormones, inflammation, and network dynamics all matter. The second is that conscious experience is not meaningless just because it is physical. Once a content becomes conscious, it can change what the organism does next. It can be remembered, spoken, questioned, resisted, practiced, trusted, doubted, or used as a reason for action. This is the central loop. The brain creates conscious states. Conscious states, when they gain access to attention, memory, language, body regulation, and social exchange, change the future conditions of the brain. The loop is not supernatural. It is not trivial. It is what makes the simple picture fail. Consciousness is produced by the system, and then some of what it produces becomes part of the system's own control. The everyday evidence is not spectacular. It is in the small seconds where life changes direction. The moment a person notices anger before speaking, the moment a breath is lengthened and the body receives a different signal, the moment pain is interpreted with less fear, the moment a thought is recognized as a thought rather than mistaken for the whole world, the moment another person's voice steadies the room, the moment a child follows a pointing finger and inherits a shared world. These are not miracles. They are not proof that the mind floats outside the body. They are examples of a nervous system using conscious access to regulate itself. A thought is not just a thought when it changes breathing. A word is not just a sound when it reorganizes attention. A belief is not just an idea when it alters threat prediction. A shared rhythm is not just atmosphere when it coordinates bodies in time. The mechanisms are ordinary, but their consequences are deep. The humility is just as important. Consciousness cannot control every process it touches. It cannot guarantee healing, erase trauma by command, prevent intrusive thoughts, or make the body immune to damage. Much of the brain remains hidden. Much of the body remains automatic. Much of the social world shapes us before we can choose it. The conscious self is not an emperor inside the skull. It is a moving pattern of access, interpretation, and regulation inside a larger living system. But a moving pattern can matter. A river is not separate from its banks because it changes them slowly. A flame is not separate from the fuel and air because it has a shape of its own. A melody is not separate from the instruments because it can guide the next phrase. Consciousness may be like that. Not an extra substance added to the brain, not a useless glow after the work is done, but a dynamic organization that the brain produces and then uses. The first mismatch was simple. Attention felt like a spectator, but measurement and experience showed it changing the system it observed. By the end, the mismatch has become more precise. Consciousness is not outside biology, yet biology is not a one-way machine. It is made of loops. Perception loops through prediction. Attention loops through action. The body loops through the brain. Other people loop through language, rhythm, and meaning. The conscious moment sits inside these loops as a place where selected information becomes usable. That may be the calmest way to approach the remaining problem without pretending to close it. The brain does not merely make a world and show it to a silent observer. It makes a world that can notice parts of itself, and that noticing can change what the brain does next. The mystery that remains is real, but it is no longer empty. It has a shape. Neural activity becoming experience, experience becoming regulation, regulation changing the next moment of neural activity. So when attention returns to the breath, the act is small, almost ordinary. Air enters, the chest moves, the brain predicts, corrects, and listens. A hidden body signal becomes conscious for a few seconds, and the system that created awareness is quietly altered by what awareness has selected. Nothing has left the laws of biology. Nothing has been reduced to a dead mechanism either. In that small loop, the mind is neither a ghost nor a shadow. It is the living brain learning, for a moment, how to hold itself